Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. I'm Emmanuel, I'm a former Boeing 737 pilot and a member of the PMDG 737 tech team. In today's video I want to emphasize and expand on how to program an engine out SID in the Boeing 737 FMC. Now, I did already cover the topic in my FMC tutorial, but judging on the amount of additional questions and feedback that I've gotten, I do want to once again emphasize and clarify that topic. So let's get right into this. Today we're standing at Milano Malpensa Airport and we are going to program the engine out SID for runway 35 right. First of all, we do need a database on where to find those engine out SIDs, and my personal favorite here is the website from fellow YouTuber Blackbox711. I can absolutely recommend it. I will link it in the video description below so that you guys can have a look. He has probably the greatest engine out database that you are going to find in flight simulation. So when you're on his website, you go to the web app and then you search for the airport in question, and then you get this briefing document down here that gives you a lot of useful information such as the noise abatement procedure in use and also the engine failure routings. So let's now go ahead and have a look into what we are going to do for those engine failures. So we're going to depart from runway 35 right. We can see we've got an acceleration altitude at 2,300 feet over here, and the engine out SID is at 40 ME Mike Papa, right turn, radial 304, inbound Saronno, and thereafter it would say and hold. So that is what we have to fly. Now, how exactly are we actually going to program this in our FMC? And this is where most of the questions came in. So a lot of you are kind of tempted to say, oh yeah, let's use route 2 to program that. But that is actually incorrect, because you cannot reliably program this in the route 2 feature of a Boeing aircraft. Instead, we are going to use a combination of the active route together with the fix pages of the FMC to program the engine out SID. So let's get started. Now, the first question is, how do we program the 4 miles from Mike Papa that we are supposed to fly? So, EOSID at 40 ME Mike Papa, right hand turn. So here's how we can do this. So we go to the fix page, we enter Mike Papa over here, and then we draw a ring, /4, and enter that over here. And now we have an exact marking at 4 miles from Mike Papa. Now, so far so good, but why are we not doing this through the route 2 function? Well, that answer is quite easy, because with route 2 you can either draw a distance just from the runway or a distance from the station. But imagine that the VOR that we are using is not located exactly on the runway. So now we could only draw that feature from right here. Now, while it looks rather similar when we're departing runway 35 right, think about what would happen if we were departing runway 35 left, which is located quite a bit further to the west, so somewhere over here. Now, then, if we drew that thing through the route 2 feature, then we would actually be commanded to do a right-hand turn to that waypoint, unless you got a magical way to figure out exactly how to determine the distance from that VOR on the extended center line of a runway. Small tip, you will not, at least not without major calculations taking place that we're not supposed to do as pilots. We're supposed to keep things as simple as possible. Now, that much about why we're using a ring to mark the turn rather than using, for example, the route 2 feature. However, there is a second point to be made for this, and that's the next part of the engine out SID. So if we have a look at this, it now tells us to conduct a right-hand turn to radial 304 inbound to Saronno. So we need radial 304 inbound to Saronno. Now, you could obviously create a place bearing distance waypoint on route 2, but you would have to somehow judge the turn radius for your turn. And that is not all that easy. So, as mentioned, we are pilots, that means we are dumb, and therefore we want easy solutions. So let's go to the fix info page number 2. We take Sierra Romeo November, enter that in here, and as you can see, the fix info page allows us to enter both a radial and a distance. So now we can just type in radial 304, but there is a little caveat to that. So when typing 304, you can see we're getting the radial right up here. Note that in some cases, if the engine out information does not give you the radial but rather gives you the bearing, you might have to add or subtract 180 degrees in order to get the correct radial for the insertion on the fix page over here. Remember, a radial is always something going away from the station. So when we look at Sarano up here, I think it's probably easier to show you that on the plan mode. So if we just take Sarano over here, then radial 304 goes away like that. It does not equal 304 degrees inbound to the station, but it would actually be 124 degrees inbound to the station. So radial is always away from the station. So how exactly are we going to fly this SID now? So we climb straight out to 40 ME, then we make a long right-hand turn over here, intercept that radial inbound to Sarano. The terrain display tells us straight away why that radial is defined for our inbound track, because, well, obviously there is mountains right behind it. So that's the reason why we go straight to here and then make a right-hand turn, intercept this, inbound to the station. Now, after that, we would also get a holding at the station. Unfortunately, it's a little bit cut off for this particular example, but you can see at the example of all the other runways that it always says "and hold" behind it. So that is what we want to do. Now, how are we going to find out about the holding information? Well, there's a couple of sources that we can use. Unfortunately, all of them do require a Navigraph subscription, and they do involve the en route charts. So either you could just zoom in on the en route chart, and if a holding is defined, then you can see that on the en route chart over here. And, well, depending on the particular chart in question, it would also tell you the exact radials. For example, when we just go back in over here, we can see it's 133 degrees inbound to Sarano VOR for the standard holding. So if there is no other information except for the track mentioned, then it's always right-hand turns and a lag time of 1 minute below flight level 140 and 1 minute 30 seconds above flight level 140. That's standard ATPL knowledge there. So how are we going to define that holding? So there is two ways we can do this. We know that the inbound course is 133 degrees. So the opposite of that is 313 degrees. So if you want to take a manual holding solution, you could enter 313 degrees, put that down here on the fix page, and now it draws you the inbound turn or the inbound lag for your holding. That way you can use heading select mode to fly the holding. However, let's go for a little easier solution, and that one can be done over the legs page. Now, you do not need route 2 for this, you can do all of this in route 1. So we go to the very end of the legs page, and over here we are going to enter that Sierra Romeo November VOR that we need. So we got Sierra Romeo November, and we enter that behind the last waypoint of the missed approach. Note that you have to enter an approach at your destination for this to work, which you should always do anyway, but some flight simmers have a tendency not to do that because they're reading some strange myth on the internet. So always enter the approach when you prepare the FMC. If that changes en route, you can always change it in the FMC. So behind the last waypoint of the missed approach, we're going to enter that station. Then we are going to create a route discontinuity. How do we do that? By entering any other waypoint on top. So in front of this fix where we want to insert the hold. So for example, I'm going to go for a waypoint called Triple Alpha. Enter that over here, and you can see that now it has created the route discontinuity behind it. Next, we are going to delete that waypoint that we have just entered, that placeholder waypoint. And now you can see you got the complete missed approach, then you got the discontinuity, and behind that you got the waypoint at which you want to enter the holding. So now the rest is easy. Simply go to the hold page. Note that if there is any existing hold in the flight plan, for example from your approach procedure or from your missed approach procedure, you might have to press execute and then next holding. And then you can select this waypoint. So we select the waypoint, we create a holding. Now we simply enter the details. So it's 133 inbound and right hand turns. Yep, that should have been without the slash. So 133, right hand turns. The lag time by default is 1 minute down here. You could adjust that, and what you can even do is to enter a target altitude over here to determine your holding altitude. So for example, when looking at the SID, we can see the MSA is 8,300 down here. However, we can also see that that's the case because of the mountains up here. So since this place here is where the terrain is set at 3,000 feet or below, we could, for example, just enter a holding at 5,000 feet over here at Throttle. So what you could do is you just go 50 above. I would always enter it as an above altitude. You enter that over here and that's it. Now, do note that depending on the constraints on your missed approach path, you may get an error message when you do this. In that case, you can't enter it, but in most cases you can. And I do find that to be a very useful way of entering the holding at the end of the legs page. Now simply press execute, and now you can see that that holding is already predefined on your navigation display over here. So now, if you get into an engine out situation, what you can do is quite simple. If you now have the engine out, you fly straight ahead to the 4DME point using heading select. When you're passing that, you make a right hand turn in heading select to fly onto that radial inbound to Sierra Romeo November. When you're inbound there, just go to the legs page, select the end of the legs pages, copy that waypoint, create a direct. You can even use the course in function so that you can just define the radial here now. So that's one of the advantages of having the radial drawn here with a green line. It tells you immediately which radial it is. So you can simply use the course in function. Remember, you want to track inbound, so you got to take the opposite number from the radial. So if it says radial 304, then you have to type course in 124, radial minus 180, and then you can simply LNAV, so that with heading select you fly yourself onto that line. Once your wings level, press LNAV, and then the airplane intercepts the course inbound in LNAV, so that you got full automatic guidance for the engine out procedure. Now the best thing about doing it this way is that you do not even get any disturbances in the takeoff calculation. So you can see, or in the progress calculation, you can see it still shows you the distance to destination and the fuel that you're expected to have when you're arriving at that destination, even though you got that waypoint at the end of the legs page. This only works if you have the route discontinuity in there, so always remember to insert that one. Well, and that's how to fly an engine out SID using the FMC of the Boeing 737. I do hope you found this one interesting. Be sure to leave your feedback in the comments underneath the video. As always, like, comment and subscribe, and if you really love what I'm doing on this channel, I would appreciate a small donation through the Buy Me Coffee link in the video description below. Thank you very much for watching, and I'm looking forward to see you all again on the next one.